TK Arun, Mr. Sharma, other dignitaries representing the telecom industry, CEOs, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate ETTelecom because apart from bringing us all the news on a day-to-day basis, in the last few years, I think this event has grown in stature. I can see that today, for example, you've really managed a huge crowd in Delhi, which is testimony to how important the ET Mobile Conclave has become. There was a lot of reference to the new digital communication policy and what is it that the policy environment has in store for us and what is the future outlook of the sector. I think these are all very important questions. So I thought I would address my remarks across 4 different areas. One is very briefly present to you what I see as the current context. Second, what were the policy imperatives that drove the NDCP 18? What is the next reform agenda that we need to start looking at? And some areas where I think we can spell out some concrete actions going forward. So first of all, in terms of the context, I think in the last couple of years, we have seen 2 or 3 things happening. I would say broadly 3 things. One is that India is really digitizing at a very rapid rate. Compared to many other countries, we have seen that not only is the pace of digitization, it's really gathered speed in the last couple of years, but the digital footprint itself is now almost fairly ubiquitous. This has also happened at a time when our stakes in digitization have gone up much more. There is this ICRIER study. By now, all of you are probably familiar with that, because what that study shows is that the rewards of digitization for India in terms of incremental GDP growth are almost 3 times what it is for the rest of the world. Therefore, the significance. So how we digitize, the rate at which we digitize is going to be very critical for India's future in a larger sense. The second big trend that has happened is the convergence of technologies, the advent of new technologies like 5G, and the transformation that all these are promising. I think the point to note here is that these are not just a new generation of the same old technology, but in a sense, they are whole new technologies, which is why it's not easy to predict how exactly they are going to impact our economy and society. We get glimpses, but it's possible that what 5G will do in India, or what augmented reality, or what blockchain, or what IoT would do for India would be quite different from what it can do in the rest of the countries. We'll have to actually see how this plays out. So the change of technology is a big factor, and I think whether it's the government, the regulator, or the industry leaders, or the service providers, everybody has to now adapt to the pace of change and make sure that they remain at the cutting edge of this and that they're able to harness these technologies in a way that makes sense. And the third big change that has happened is today's telecom sector in India looks very different from what it looked like even 3 years ago. There have been exits, not so happy for the people involved. There have been mergers and acquisitions, many of them ongoing still, huge consolidation, but also convergence and the telecom service providers themselves morphing or undergoing certain changes, which again I think have not played out fully. We'll have to wait to see how they actually play out. But we are beginning to see, a major convergence of communication, of content and computing. So content, we are at the beginning stages. Video, augmented reality, all of that is just beginning to come in. We're just beginning to see the shape of that. Again, intelligence is just coming in with data analytics and intelligence at the edge linked to the cloud. This again, I think we're in beginning stages, but all these are moving very rapidly, so we really cannot say. In India, what we've typically seen is that in some areas you will see very rapid change and growth. And nobody can really, at this stage, indicate clearly where it is. But 2 or 3 things are very evident, that the era of data has finally come to India. We have seen a big shift into data. The rate at which we are consuming data, with India becoming the largest consumer of data, and with the new startups that are coming in areas around data, around IoT, around blockchain. I think, so these are all very promising developments. So while we have seen consolidation and exits, we're also seeing hyper competition between a small set of players. And that, again, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. But looking at the capabilities and the size of the operators who remain, I think it is not unrealistic to expect that they're all smart enough to figure out how to actually play the market. So I think this is the broad context. And therefore, the policy imperatives that drove the new policy are, one, that we will have to ensure that the existing industry is healthy and fair. We have said that explicitly in the policy. We have said that we must further reform the investment environment so that investments can flow in and new technologies can come to India sooner rather than later. Third, we have said that we must get broadband out to all, given the kind of stakes that the average Indian and the Indian economy as a whole has in broadband. We have said that India needs to develop core capabilities in ICTs. One, because India is the second largest country in the world, and also because the whole digital sector is now increasingly becoming a strategic sector for any country. And therefore, certainly India cannot be far behind. So security and resilience of the networks, as well as trust in the networks, that becomes paramount, given that all our lives are transiting onto the digital platforms. So these were the broad imperatives that drove the policy. I also want to flag here that the last 2 years have been years of intense reform. This has been overtaken to some extent by the fact that the industry shape has been shifting so much. So more of the focus has been on the structural changes in the industry and less on the reform. But let me just flag to you some of the big changes that have happened. First of all, in order to alleviate the stress that some of the operators have been facing in the industry, the government approved a package, and you would all be aware because the package was approved quite some time back. The biggest relief that that package gave was that spectrum payments, which was a big part of their debt to the government, that was eased by almost 8,000 crores per year for the next almost 9 years. I don't think that is a trivial relief that the government has given. Industry may have different opinions on whether this is enough, but the point is that the most important part of the fiscal stress that the industry was facing, I think, did get addressed in this. Second, given that consolidation was the need of the hour, the spectrum cap was relaxed. The TRAI, had given us recommendations on what should be the new caps given the new structure of the industry. And we have worked to make sure that the mergers and acquisitions, some of them have already happened. One of the biggest mergers and acquisitions happened, but others are in progress. Again, double taxation, which was one of the big constraints which was holding up the growth of virtual network operators or smaller operators within the large TSP framework. We did away with that, and we expect that in the coming months, much more opportunities will be opened up for smaller, decentralized players who will be complementary to the big players and who are necessary in order to take this to the last mile. Again, I think I must, on this occasion, thank the regulator, because whether it is on the Wi-Fi grid concept or whether it is on how to take fixed wire access, there have been a series of reform-oriented recommendations that have come from the regulator. And therefore, we expect that the telcos have already started work on the Wi-Fi grid. But I think what the telcos also need to recognize is that they cannot do everything themselves. They need to open up spaces within their own ecosystems so that they can partner with smaller players. And that way, I think the possibilities of monetization will actually be realized sooner rather than later. Again, delicensing of spectrum. The biggest ever delicensing of spectrum of 650 megahertz was done a few months ago during the India Mobile Congress. And we expect that this again will make it, because it is now delicensed, we expect that there will be both equipment manufacturing beginning in India in order to cater to the Wi-Fi and decentralized licensed segment, but also players can come in and provide localized services. Again, for the first time, the telecom sector has been declared as one of the champion sectors. A financial package has been approved. For the first time this year, we have put money in the budget for the champion sectors, because the telecom sector has not so far actually looked at how to support startups, R&D, and so on. But for the first time, we have launched that effort. Just about a month ago, we had initiated consultations with 5 major industry associations to see how local telco startups in different areas could be supported. And I think we see that as a very, very key area going forward. Again, on M2M and cloud, we have approved the recommendations given by TRAI, and we expect that this will trigger both the growth of the cloud industry in India as well as the growth of IoT and M2M, which are very promising areas where India has a lot of capability, particularly in IoT and M2M. Now, what do I see as the reform agenda going forward? And I think these are some of the areas where we would need to work on. One is converged governance and regulation. And I think, Arun, you just referred to that while you were talking to the regulator. Absolutely. I think we will increasingly have to look at these things holistically. But I'm glad to say that the MeitY, the DST, the Principal Scientific Advisor, and the DOT, along with the regulator, we are already looking at a much more holistic, converged regulation on many of these things. Second, I think India is fairly fortunate in that while there are many things that have not got done, in the area of data and digital, I think the policies have been largely forward-looking. We have a whole set of next-generation policies on the anvil, whether it's data protection, whether it is the cloud, whether it's national critical infrastructure protection, whether it is core ICTs, the new electronics policy, the new e-commerce policy. I don't think, all these policies may not be perfect, but at least they show that, this is the direction in which we intend to go. And on all this, work is going on. And the effort has been to have as consultative and open a process in consultation with industry on most of these things. Definitely, I see a big need for a new partnership with states and stakeholders. Telecom, so far, the states have not had a major role, but with 8 states actually taking ownership of the implementation of BharatNet, that is a big shift. But also in terms of the Digital Readiness Index, which we intend to launch with the states shortly, work is going on that. But mainly to ensure that our infrastructure policies are much more aimed at ease of doing business. So we do recognize that whether it is fiberization, whether it is having more towers, we will probably need to have 3 to 4 times the number of towers and at least a doubling of the fiber infrastructure, if not more, maybe a tripling. All this will require a strong partnership with the states, which we have already initiated. Again, I think whether it is 5G or the new technologies, the government will have to take the lead and partner with industry and also put its money where its mouth is so that we can catalyze new business models. I don't think merely having a policy will be enough to bring in new technologies. I think we need to ensure that robust business models are developed for deployment of these new technologies. And therefore, beginning with 5G, government will have to drive this process and also drive public investments so that we can develop use cases that make most sense to us. Similarly, on the core ICTs, a much stronger coalition between the academic institutions, between government, and between industry needs to be there. We will be sitting down with the telcos to see how it can be a win-win, because now we are seeing that there are certain startup companies which have a lot of promise. So right from the chip design all the way to the IoT platforms, I think collaboration can be very fruitful. A partnership between the telcos, for example, and the IT platforms could perhaps catalyze the creation of an India telecom stack. Mr. R.S. Sharma has been one of the key pioneers of the India digital stack on the IT side, but I think there's equal potential and opportunity to create an India telecom stack. So whether it is the smart city, whether it is IoT deployment in agriculture, or some of the other areas where we have problems that are unique to us, but also an opportunity that is unique to us. I think those are all areas where we can work. And lastly, of course, security and resilience are key. We have, in the last year, we've done a fair amount of work. The public disaster relief network, there is a lot of work done on that. We are also taking benefit of TRI's regulations. Yesterday when we were discussing about how to take that to the next level. In the last year, we partnered to bring best security practices into networks, security audits of the networks, and I think going forward, our policy will be to ensure that we continuously monitor and bring in the latest best practices because security is becoming a key concern. So I just want to end on this note that the work actually begins now. The policy, of course, the best policy, is only a statement of intent. But I think if we can actually build and deploy these coalitions, then I think, given the fact that we still have 2/3 of the market ahead of us, given the huge hunger that Indians have for technology, I think it is a very promising growth market. Thank you.